British Railways Board, under the chairmanship of Dr. Richard Beeching, have completed the investigations they were asked to make and published their proposals.
The days of steam are rapidly coming to an end. A sad thought for small boys, perhaps, but a glad thought for most who welcome the diesel locomotive as steam's successor.
A railway system such as ours can never be complete. It must always be renewing itself, part by part, like a living thing, altering even the nature of its energy.
There was no turning back.
I think that these proposals are in the long-term interests of railway.
A very tricky time indeed.
By the end of standard gauge steam on British railways in August 1968, over 16,000 locomotives have been withdrawn and scrapped in just under 10 years.
It offers us the prospect of being able to cut out a very large part of the route mileage with a very high cost with it.
It would have been awfully nice to keep a lot of these smaller stations open, but with the best will in the world, one couldn't really say you could do anything else. But it's a great shame, I think, that it did happen like that.
The closure is the last move in pruning down a service already condemned.
British Railways have got to do their damnedest to get some results here and now with what they've got to show that they can do something which is going to justify this investment.
Intercity brings something good into their lives.
We think that maybe a maximum speed of 125 miles per hour is what we need to fight off the competition for the next 10, 15, perhaps even 20 years.
It's the prototype of a high-speed express service scheduled for intercity routes in about 2 years' time. A promise of even faster and more comfortable commuting for Britain's business jet set.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the prototype high-speed express.
British Rail's new express is wooing passengers with high-speed technology outside and in. You're quite impressed, though.
Oh, yes, very nice indeed.
Designated Class 252. A few small problems encountered with the prototype were ironed out at this stage. The cabs are made from fiberglass and are reinforced, giving the driver vital extra protection. At this time, one power car was being completed every week.
The great days of the railway. People say they're over. The facts say they're not.
See your dealer about an Intercity 125. Much quicker leasing. Think of 1.6, 2.3.
I think I got about half of that, Heidi.
The high-speed train left the central station in Newcastle and broke 3 world speed records. A very successful train.
Jimmy Savile.
So why not do what I do? Take the train.
The age of the train, well, it's 30, but is it the end of the line for the 125?
You're going to miss the trains, aren't you?
Yes, I am, yeah.
In the 1950s there was a great deal of change occurring. The BBC was moving towards television from radio. The new Elizabethan era was just beginning and the railways would start to see a big change.
Mainline diesel-electric locomotives, though familiar to rail travellers in America, are unknown in this country. Or should I say, were unknown. For in 1947, 2 companies, the LMS Railway and the English Electric Company, pooled their resources to produce diesel-electric locomotive number 10,000, the first express diesel to be operated in Britain. This first diesel locomotive is powered by a 1600 horsepower engine. Locomotive number 10,000 is an impressive sight as she moves slowly out of the shop. The men who for weeks have worked at her building are there to give her a send-off. While engine number 10,000 was being completed at Derby, another locomotive of conventional design was being built at Crewe. Number 6256, Sir William Stanier, and a sister engine of the same design will work in friendly rivalry with the diesel and will provide comparable data on the 2 forms of traction on the heaviest mainline duties. At Euston, on the 17th of December 1947, the 2 new locomotives, steam and diesel-electric, made their first public appearance. Romance still clings to the steam engine, but romance alone will not run the railways. New ideas, new methods must be given a chance to succeed. Overseas buyers can see hundreds of these engines. Now, we shall be able to bring overseas buyers to see this engine operating on our railways, after which we hope the engine will sell itself. And so, with the entry into the railway service of locomotive number 10,000, a new page has been turned in the history of rail development in Britain. While the steam engine must remain for some considerable time the principal means of locomotion, it now has, in number 10,000, a new challenger. Railwaymen who all their lives have been used to the familiar tattoo of the exhaust of steam engines stopped a while from their work as the black and silver, softly purring diesel went by. Is this, they thought, the shape of things to come?
Rudolf Diesel himself had overseen early trials of diesel-powered locomotives in Germany. And by the 1950s, diesel trains were well established in countries like the US. Here, however, things took longer because countries like Britain that had vast reserves of coal found it much harder to wean themselves off steam power. As far as rail was concerned, Britain remained hooked on steam far longer than it should have.
Coinciding with the news of a cut in train services as part of the campaign to save coal, there comes to London for its naming ceremony the first of British Railways standard locomotives. To the experts, it's a Class 7 462. And into this locomotive have been incorporated many of the best ideas from engines of the era before nationalisation. Work on it began some months ago, when designers from the various regions got together and pooled their ideas. It was not long before Britain's largest railway workshops were on the job. And with barely a flutter of excitement, a revolution in engine design was accomplished. Amid the clatter of crew, the standard loco was taking shape. A new giant of the permanent way was got ready to take its permanent place in the engine spotter's notebook. Britannia. The Minister of Transport, Mr. Barnes, put the newcomer officially into action. Before uncovering the brass nameplate, Mr. Barnes said that this latest British engineering product was the first of 160 standard-type locomotives to come off the assembly lines this year.
Britain still leads the world with a steam locomotive.
And there for all to see was proof that Britannia now rules the rails as well.
Steam locomotive is the nearest approach a man-made machine will ever be to a human being. Every driver and fireman looks upon this machine as a female. He always calls it she, never it, never he.
Once a steam man, always a steam man.
Good.
That's what nothing to touch him.
That's what
you
don't know what you're talking about.
You're electric.
Well, I don't. Yes, I've never been on it.
But
steam, I enjoy.
There's two or three of us here. We've all worked steam, electrics, and diesel. Yeah. And for the best engine of the lot is the electric.
The Royal Scot, leaving Euston in the 1930s, when railways were still heroic. They had been heroic since the beginning, since 1825. The railway had its part in many remembered moments. When you parted, it was at Euston or Liverpool Lime Street or Edinburgh Waverley that you said goodbye. People travelled less, but remembered it more.
The railways kept producing steam trains whilst the newer replacements were being slowly introduced. The love affair with steam trains was not going to die quietly.
British Railways were promised a new lease of life, a vast modernisation plan to be carried out over 15 years at a cost of more than £1,500 million. The days of the grand old steam locomotives were numbered.
In 1955, for the first time ever, a largely steam-driven British rail network was running at a loss. Increased competition from road transport, much of it now running on diesel, was eating away at rail profits. And when British Railways published its 1955 modernisation plan, it recommended that much of the network convert to diesel power.
The financial troubles of the railways were clearly visible.
The threat which has hung over Britain for months suddenly becomes reality. Drivers and firemen desert their footplates, the fires are drawn, and our economic life suffers a stranglehold which no other group of skilled workers could have imposed. A strange way to convince the public that the loco men's claim is just.
I was one of those youngsters who felt that I'd like to play with a toy train, and I've continued playing with it ever since. We thought that when we started started work in the industry, we wanted to make it progressive to the point where everybody appreciated travelling on railways and would like to travel. But this, what with the increased fares on railways discouraging passengers one way or another, has made things a bit difficult.
The first fruits of the plan to eliminate steam are epitomised by the entry into service of the English electric Deltic. At the time, the 3,300 horsepower developed by the Deltic's twin Napier diesel engines was far in excess of anything else in the world. In 1956, Deltic was tried out over the Settle and Carlisle line.
The electric trains, developed from 1941, were set to deal the second blow to steam.
Liverpool Street Station, December 1956. The air heavy with smoke and steam from many trains.
Trains at Witten for Malden and Braintree. Trains at Marks for...
Today there are other changes in the air. The train on platform 13 is for Southend-on-Sea. But this is the last journey on the steam line. All change here for electricity. The engine driver, perhaps remembering small boys noting loco numbers, looks back before his final run.
Diesel and electric were now pushing steam off the railways slowly.
Despite the fact that nearly 2,000 standard and non-standard engines had been built by the mid-50s, the writing was on the wall for steam power.
From the top of the driving coach, a new shape makes contact.
The railways allowed people to say their final goodbyes to steam, with special final services.
On the last Friday in 1956, a special steam train stood at Southend-on-Sea, Victoria. It had brought distinguished visitors to inaugurate the first electric service between Southend-on-Sea and Liverpool Street. Newspaper reporters interviewed the driver of the steam loco on duty for the last time.
It was over 2 years later, March 1958, that Movietone News actually broke the incredible Deltic story.
One outstanding item in the modernisation of British railways is the new Deltic diesel-electric locomotive. It's reported that over 20 of them, the most powerful of their type in the world, are being ordered, and that they'll haul such famous expresses as the Flying Scotsman and the Elizabethan. What a contrast the clean diesel-electric makes compared with the old, smoky, coal-burning locos.
A demonstration run from London to Bristol.
Deltics were coming thick and fast.
He's at the controls of British Railways' new 2,000 horsepower diesel hydraulic loco. A special coach next to the engine was used on this trip to demonstrate and record speed and performance. The plan is the replacement of steam by diesel traction on the western region, giving greater economy, cleanliness and speed.
The steam engine is obsolete, and I'll give you a case in point, Jack. You'll take heavy coal train from Sheffield, a single load, about 41 coal, won't it? Right, today the electric will take more.
Well, there's not the skill, I don't care a bugger what you say, there's not the skill in driving an electric or a diesel engine as there is in driving a steam train.
And now, the new service begins.
It's the first BBC building to be designed for television, and it came into operation this summer.
Bobby Moore led England up to the Royal Box to receive the Jules Rimet Cup and the Winners' Medal. To be here as winners of the FA Cup has often been described as the summit of a footballer's ambition. How much greater is the triumph they enjoyed now.
England won the World Cup, broadcast on TV. The most watched television event in British history. 32.3 million people tuned in. The Labour Party's Harold Wilson became the Prime Minister in 1964, taking it from Edward Heath's Conservative Party. And the brand new science fiction show would start to take the world by storm from 1963.
In 1960, British Railways built its last steam locomotive. But it wasn't just the age of steam trains that was ending. On the global scale, it was the great era of steam itself that was finally closing.
In 1960, a whole new train which retained the Pullman name was unveiled. These blue Pullmans were all first class and had every mod con.
Smooth, almost silent travel, I'm told, and fully air-conditioned coaches.
Ladies and gentlemen, this train is fully air-conditioned.
Double windows with adjustable Venetian blinds between the panes of glass. The armchair seats are adjustable too, and I've no doubt that those who sit in them will find that menus have also been modernised to produce the new diesel-electric Pullman train, evidence of British Railways' progress in their streamlining and modernisation programme.
They were the first train in the UK to have a similar style to the HST, the top and tail power car, and built as a set. They weren't particularly fast, with a maximum speed of just 90 miles per hour, but they demonstrated the possibility of a fixed formation multiple unit intercity train service. Seen as the forerunners of the HSTs, only 5 sets were ever built.
One of 5 similar trains now coming into service showed its paces on a run from London's Marylebone Station. Therefore the London-Manchester and Leicester route, also London-Birmingham. And they'll set a standard of comfort really in the luxury class. There'll be no immediate reduction of journey times, but as the new diesels can maintain 90 miles an hour with ease, they may mean a revision of the timetables before long.
With a ticket from Manchester to London costing just under £5.
They're so comfortable, they'll have to have somebody going round to say, "Wake up, sir, you're here."
At the beginning of railways history is Stephenson's rocket. Today it's the blue Pullman. The last word in gracious riding. One goes from Manchester to London, this one from Brunel's Paddington to Bristol, at a smooth and silent 90 miles an hour, and drawing room comfort. Because Britain is small in size and great in industry, because her 50 million people inhabit only 90,000 square miles and use almost every acre, because the nation is forever on the move, the railways of Britain are the busiest in the world. A railway system such as ours can never be complete. It must always be renewing itself part by part, like a living thing, altering even the nature of its energy. More speed demands more elbow room. At Folkestone, 2 extra lines will be needed in 1962 to keep the many electric services and the boat trains from impeding each other. They are converting their craft from old to new, moving forward from the age of steam. One of the first depots in the country, built specially for the maintenance of mainline diesel locos, is to be found at Finsbury Park. A broad glass structure with 6 roads and 2-level maintenance, which can handle up to 150 of this kind of engine.
Introducing you to the newest type of electric loco for British Railways, At Sandbach in Cheshire, Lord Chandos, for the makers, handed over a key to Lord Rusholme, Chairman London Midland area, and contact is made between engine and overhead cables, which marks a big step forward in the British Railways modernisation plan.
New equipment, new ideas, and most important of all, a new spirit of determination to ensure that our railways will soon once again beat the world. The days of steam are rapidly coming to an end. A sad thought for small boys, perhaps, but a glad thought for most who welcome the diesel locomotive as steam's successor. The Deltic diesel, by the way, or on the way as it is now, is the most powerful locomotive in the world, capable of sustaining high speeds up to 100 miles an hour. Stations rush past, bridges disappear. The dynamic Deltic is part of the plan to make Britain's railways the world's best, and what a part it is playing.
The Deltic was to rail transport what Concorde was to aviation, the most advanced, most powerful technology of its kind.
But the Deltic, of course, is only part of the modernisation programme, typical of new ideas introduced daily in the race against time.
Filing into the Albert Hall, these were leaders of industry, directors inhabiting high spheres where the very handshakes are golden. Dr. Beeching was going to tell the Institute of Directors, this was their annual conference, how the railways can be made to pay. The railways can be made to pay. The railways can be made to pay.
Some people seem to be of the opinion that all you have to do is to make the railways pay and everybody is happy. I'm afraid they're disillusioned. They haven't seen that the majority of the railwaymen, morale is very low.
British railways are the busiest in the world, and yet they lose enough money to put something like 9p on the income tax. Now, the British Railways Board, under the chairmanship of Dr. Richard Beeching, have completed the investigations they were asked to make and published their proposals.
It offers us the prospect of being able to cut out a very large part of the route mileage with the very high cost associated with it and still keep 95% of the traffic on what is left.
Now, this whole vast network is vital no longer. Much of the country's transport needs can be provided by other means, often more convenient.
Some of you will say, well, what about all this modernisation? Can't we have the branch lines as well? Can't you attract enough traffic to them to make them pay? But unfortunately, we can't.
Railwaymen themselves are now faced with this prospect of another 70,000 jobs being lost to this industry. Do you believe that they'll go along with you in this plan?
I think they can. I don't think that they will put their heads in the sand. I think that these proposals are in the long-term interests of railwaymen. I think they'll go along with us.
The real question is whether you, as owners of the railways, want us to go on running these services at very high cost when the demand for them has very largely disappeared. This closure of services is a necessary part, or at least a necessary accompaniment of the other process of building up the good parts of the railway, those parts that carry nearly all the traffic now. Nearly all the rail services run parallel with bus services.
Full trains mean spreading the movement cost per unit and making it cheap. The proposal is to go for development and improvement to raise all these intercity services to the level of the best of the named trains.
1/3 of the country's 7,000 railway stations were to be closed. Passenger services would be withdrawn from around 5,000 route miles. According to Beeching, his changes would result in an improvement in BR accounts of between £115 and £147 million.
In 1964, the share of the world's power generated from coal fell below 50% for the first time. We had entered a new epoch of energy production, an age increasingly powered by the diesel engine.
After Beeching's chilling report, a development abroad would really give BR a kick up the backside.
The big development, of course, was the establishment of the world's first high-speed train in Japan.
Because of this train, many countries started looking towards high-speed trains.
Early morning at the Tokyo terminal of Japan's Super Express, the Shinkansen. Hikari 23 sets out on her long journey. Each 16-car train carries 1,400 passengers. 1 billion people have Shinkansen trains as legendary. Comfortable seats, air conditioning, and an almost total absence of noise from the track lull the traveler into a mood of total relaxation. Top speed, 130 miles per hour. Scrupulous track and car maintenance ensure that the Shinkansen trains can run for long stretches at top speed and in complete safety.
It ran at 150, 180 miles an hour on dedicated tracks.
Wherever possible, the track goes through mountains rather than around them, since a straight track also helps the train to maintain high speeds.
The Japanese were quick to learn the benefits of new railways. They use little of their precious land, yet make the best use of dwindling supplies of energy. And now, 2 more lines are being built, part of a national plan to provide a high-speed network to cover the whole of Japan.
People would constantly tell you how wonderful the bullet train was, with no telling you about how much it cost, how much it was subsidized, how the government was so behind it, how it had taken years and years and years to develop, and how they constantly improved it.
They were taking railways to new heights, doing new and very exciting things, making whole new systems, and we were doing nothing.
And Hikari 23 arrives precisely on time.
In a desperate bid for fresh ideas,
British Rail had a problem. It only had a finite pot of money. It had to decide where to invest that money. Do you invest in something which is going to be just the new stock to cope of the old rail network, or do you invest wholesale in a complete new system?
So, to wrangle this problem in 1964, British Rail set up a research centre in Derby.
Derby, centre of British Rail research. Here in this £4 million technical centre, British Rail concentrates all its design, research and development work.
Contrary to what many people think, British Rail was actually a very innovative organisation, and it was a completely integrated operation. So it ran the trains, it actually developed trains, it built trains.
This was new cutting-edge technology, and it was mainly people who come from outside the rail industry and didn't have this desire to evolve what was there before.
to the disgust of British Rail's own engineers, they recruited people with no experience of the railways at all. This new department was headed by a 30-year-old firebrand called Alan Wickens, a man who'd cut his teeth on planes and missiles and who knew absolutely nothing about trains.
So it called in kind of engineers from different sectors like aeronautics and said, you know, how do we do this?
Tomorrow's things are electric. That's what they tell us. Tomorrow's things are with us today. A vast mainline electrification scheme has just been put into service between Euston, Manchester and Liverpool. But while the London Midland region is switched on, the Western region has gone diesel. In little more than 7 years, they've spent £100 million on a fleet of 1,000 diesel locomotives and 450 diesel trains.
British Railways operate one of the largest diesel locomotive fleets in the world, the largest in Western Europe. The fleet is still growing. At the end of 1964, it consisted of over 4,000 multiple unit vehicles and 4,500 locomotives. fleet ranges from 150 horsepower shunting locos to mainline heavy freight and express passenger locomotives of 2,750 horsepower and 3,300 horsepower. By 1968, steam traction will have disappeared. Today, the diesels power about 60% of all the traffic. They are a major factor in railway modernisation. Higher pulling power moves big trains. Good acceleration helps them keep on time. Long periods of duty between overhauls make for an efficient and economic service. 2 diesels can do the work of up to 5 steam locomotives. Thus, more traffic can be handled by a smaller fleet. 22 diesels now haul some of Britain's heaviest and fastest expresses between London, the North East and Scotland. Trains for which 55 steam locomotives were used in the past. Power output has been increased. Structures have been made more effective. The result has been locomotives with more power for less weight. Today, 500 trains have scheduled start-to-stop speeds over 60 miles per hour. 27 of them average over 70 miles per hour. Speeds of 90 and 100 miles per hour are an everyday achievement. Thus, the diesels are playing their part in the building of an efficient, modern and economic railway system for Britain.
Alan's team spent the next 3 years completing their design on paper. But to turn it into a working prototype, they'd need serious cash, £5 million, and British Rail's pockets were already empty.
Got to remember, British Railways was in a parlous financial situation at this stage, making huge losses.
The revolution has meant the overthrow of the giants of steam.
The first region of British Railways which was to completely lose all of its steam traction was to be the Western region. The newsreel cameras were in action at Paddington Station on the 11th of June 1965 to record the historic departure of the last public steam train to depart from Paddington.
The Clun Castle has just made a sentimental journey from Paddington. Steam trains have a fascination that may never be challenged by any other form of transport, and this is the last of the famous Castle class. They were so successful they virtually ran the Western region for nearly 40 years.
By the end of 1965, steam had completely disappeared from the Western region.
The change to diesel power has replaced over 3,000 steam locomotives between London and the West. Clun Castle's farewell journey to Cheltenham marks the end of an era begun 127 years ago.
This Southern Counties Touring Society Enthusiast Special on the 3rd of October 1965 provided the opportunity of travelling by steam one last time on the route from London Waterloo to Ilfracombe and Torrington via Exeter and Barnstaple.
Mum and Dad, your old friend Monica.
In early 1965, a new era of rail advertising had begun.
All of them so far, yet so near by Intercity. Off-peak returns can save up to 4 bob in the pound.
With the new advertising came a new logo for BR Intercity train service.
Intercity brings something good into their lives.
When Intercity was born in 1966, it marked a big change in the way that the railways were run.
British Rail's senior management were becoming increasingly aware of serious competition from 2 direct sources.
British Rail had to bring in faster, more modern trains with better service for passengers to stay in business and survive. Airlines were growing fast and taking more passengers from the railways.
Railway companies had to fight back, and they did this by going faster and offering on the way what they would no doubt describe as a unique upmarket leisure quality journey experience trip.
I worked for a couple of years as a ticket clerk on a commuter station in the middle of nowhere.
And she was all too familiar with the out-of-date trains.
I was used to the old diesel slam door stock. You were in compartments, they were quite old, and rather worn, and they stank of cigarette smoke.
In fact, for many people, the 60s and 70s were grim.
Whenever I see it on the telly, we get this sort of jazzed up, rosy tinted, rich people's version of the 60s and 70s, and I certainly don't remember much of that.
What surprised me was how people disparaged the railways. They hated the railways. There were constant jokes. The British public thought the railways were dreadful.
New and glamorous, domestic air travel is growing rapidly, but it's the new motorways that are most attractive to travelling Brits. By the early 70s, there are 19 million cars on the road. The car is king, and the fate of Britain's railways hangs in the balance.
It was actually more convenient to drive than to go by train. Train was not an option that you would choose, so we drove literally everywhere.
It was dirty, old-fashioned, it was labour-intensive. I mean, it was appalling. Nobody cared.
Who would want to travel on the kind of trains that we had then? And so people didn't.
Speedy motorways were being built all over the country.
Painfully slowly, but we hope surely, Britain is getting the roads modern traffic must have if it's to keep moving.
The M6 is part of the scheme that will eventually link Carlisle with London, all by motorway.
A lot of good green country has been transformed into concrete motorway, and the process continues. The new motorways are growing at a monster rate.
Local sightseers made their way towards the Walmsworth Junction, the place where the opening ceremony was to be performed. Not many minutes later, the motorway was carrying vehicles at the rate of 2,500 an hour in each direction. In Doncaster, people couldn't believe their eyes.
There were actually propositions around that the railways might just actually be closed down. Some countries in the world did actually close their railways in the 60s and 70s. It's something that was great in the 19th century, but now we have the car, now we have the aeroplane. Maybe let's just forget about the railways.
British Rail is switched on for tomorrow. Their new all-electric service cuts journey time by almost an hour between Manchester and the capital. They've spent 175 million on this modernisation, which aims to entice many more travellers back to the railways because the service is cheaper and faster than any alternative. No speed restrictions like the 70-mile limit on the M1. This is a ton-up service which averages around 85 and frequently exceeds 100 miles an hour. It's the fastest high-frequency rail service in Western Europe.
Dramatic improvements would be needed if they were to stand any chance of holding on to their market share.
Railwaymen were all trying to go faster. What they did was you bought a fast locomotive and train, and then you tweaked the infrastructure. You eased the curves. You moved track across so they didn't have to slow for curves and so on. You eased junctions, and you went faster. But eventually you got to the point where you was going as fast as you could with the trains you got, and then you moved up another step.
If a conventional train hit a sharp curve at very high speed, people would be flung all over the place.
Alan's team wrestled with the problem of passenger comfort for months. Finally, a solution was found in the way a motorbike whizzes round bends by tilting. Alan recognised making an existing train tilt wouldn't be enough. His team of outsiders had to create the single most advanced rail vehicle in the world, where every component was an innovation. They proposed a revolutionary locomotive that would top an incredible 150 miles an hour, faster than any British train had ever been before. At the time, trains were averaging just 60 miles an hour. British Rail had to increase speeds.
It was quite obvious to the British Rail Board and to the government that the future of the railways was about speed.
Britain was stuck with 20,000 miles of snaking railways.
We had the problem that nobody else had. We had a railway with corners.
The line that I'm going to travel on is around a very sharp curve, and there's a speed restriction of 20 miles an hour around the whole of the curve.
You can't just start cutting off corners of train tracks and corners of Britain's cities. It was just impossible. People now lived in the places you want to put new train tracks.
Even if you could persuade homeowners to move, there's no money to lay new tracks in straight lines.
One or two people felt we were a lot of upstarts.
The difficulty was with people not believing that it could be done. They just simply say it's a load of rubbish.
In 1966, a nationwide strike occurred.
Over 100 years of railway history came to an end over the weekend of the 5th and 6th of March 1966, as sightseers and enthusiasts bid a fond farewell to the Somerset and Dorset Railway. At a crowded Bath Green Park station, the last scheduled departure was sent on its way amidst a barrage of exploding detonators. At Evercreech, the junction for the S&D's branch to Highbridge, the station master Alexander Stowe led a group of members of his staff paying their final tribute to the railway they loved. For many of the workers along the line, the routines of years are gone through for the last time, no doubt recalling memories of their working life on the Somerset and Dorset, a railway which had very much of a family feeling amongst the staff. With no service trains on the final Sunday, it was the turn of the locomotive clubs, which ran several enthusiast specials that day. There had been hopes that the S&D, along with many lines around the country listed for closure by Richard Beeching, would be saved when a new Labour government came into power in 1964, led by Harold Wilson, replacing the Conservative administration which had been in power since 1951.
Derby, centre of British rail research. A new extension has just been opened by the Minister of Transport, and we had a look at some of the work going on. This is a test rig to study hunting, the swaying that affects rolling stock at certain speeds. They're working on a rail wagon for high-speed liner trains. What about the future? This is a model of British Rail's transport of tomorrow, a passenger train that will lean on the curves. It may be in service in 5 years' time.
The engineering side of the railways was very conservative.
They took science into the railway where the railway didn't want science. I mean, it was a clash.
By 1967, Allen and his team were still desperate for funds when their research department had a visit from an ambitious Tory MP.
One of these visitors that we had was Margaret Thatcher.
I was very impressed, I must say. A very keen mind.
She waved away the entourage who wanted to try to move her on to the next presentation. She just wanted everything out of me that she could, and she pummeled me, seeking more information out of me about the economics of the railways.
Yesterday, I made my last urgent appeal to Haslam. I asked them to consider the suffering to be imposed on the citizens of our country, to consider the damage to our economy at a time when we were in trouble, to consider the frightening effect on the railway industry when every year we lose more freight to the roads, when the government was giving fresh impetus to the drive to restore prosperity to an ailing industry. Their actions could only result in more and more traffic being lost to the roads. to consider the possibility of a bitter inter-union war between themselves and the National Union of Railwaymen. It was not right that a country should be made to pay so heavy a price because of the fear of trade unionists, however understandable the fears were. This dispute is not about who does what, it is about who sits where.
There's not a lot left to say about LMS number 10,000. It was found to be underpowered and spent much of its life running between Euston, Crewe and Liverpool in tandem with stablemate number 10,001, delivered in 1948. Sadly, neither of the two pioneers were preserved. 10,000 was withdrawn in December 1963, with 10,001 following in March 1966. They met their fate at the hands of the Cutter's Torch in 1968.
A new page has been turned in the history of rail development in Britain. In number 10,000, a new challenge.
The final steam services could draw huge crowds as people came to lament the passing of an era. On the 11th of August 1968, the fires were lit for the final passenger train to be pulled by steam on the main line.
It was known as the 15 guinea special because a ticket to ride that train cost 15 guineas, and it was pulled by two types of engine, one type called the Black 5 and the last express passenger engine, which was a Pacific called Oliver Cromwell.
Beginning more than a century ago, it had helped to make Britain strong. For many who had grown up with it, steam was the railways.
And another one of the last 300 steam locomotives in service with British Railways comes to the end of the line, to its final resting place in a sidings which is becoming known as the Graveyard of Steam.
In 1 year alone, 500 locomotives, 4,000 coaches, 130,000 wagons and 250,000 tons of rail were destroyed without sentiment.
By the end of standard gauge steam on British Railways in August 1968, over 16,000 locomotives had been withdrawn and scrapped in just under 10 years. Some were disposed of by BR themselves in their own works, as seen in these shops. But with a team of 2 men taking about a week to cut up a locomotive, the sheer numbers of engines being withdrawn from service meant that the railway's own workshops couldn't cope. This resulted in many thousands of steam engines being sold to private scrapyards across the country for breaking up.
The steam engine is more than just a symbol of man's achievement. It has had a strong romantic appeal, and the dedication of countless thousands of train lovers probably surpasses that of even car or aeroplane enthusiasts, which is why the end of the line, in the real and most poignant sense, is such a nostalgic sight.
Having decided that replacing with diesel and electric, I think there was no turning back. The trouble is that it all comes down to the manpower and the cost and everything else. Everything comes back to that word cost. And it would have been awfully nice to keep a lot of these smaller stations open, but if you're not taking any passengers or not earning any revenue in this day and age, and even 40 years ago for that matter, it did matter, and people took it very seriously. And so I suppose with the best will in the world if one couldn't really say you could do anything else. But it's a great shame, I think, that it did happen like that.
They said their works would last 100 years. And even after 125, the bulldozers have a hard time tearing it all down.
Living appropriately in a station 14 months derelict, Miss Lawrence Aston, 35 years a railway worker, broods on the injustice of bureaucracy and the wrongs of the Great Western Railway.
Were you here when the last train left?
Yes, I was.
Tell me about that.
To most of them, it was just a junketing, a party, an excuse to make a noise. But to me, it was like riding behind a hearse. It really was.
Because under the very changed circumstances 40 years later, I think we'd love to have some of those railway routes available to us now, because almost certainly we'd want to put back trains on some of those lines, and now it will be almost impossible to do that because they've been built on.
Mr. May, General Manager of the Bluebell Railway, reveals an almost Victorian disappointment that this should be the last train to steam over the whole distance.
Well, the personal feeling, of course, was very much of regret. I mean, I very much regretted being part of the organisation that was doing all they could to get rid of steam as quickly as possible. And that, from that point of view, it was very sad.
This, to train lovers particularly, is an unhappy sight.
The graveyard of engines, where past kings of the iron road are broken up. Of steel they were made, and to steel they return.
Old locomotives are being cut up for scrap metal at the rate of 2 or 3 every week.
And every pound of steel is guarded as carefully as a milligram of precious metal by a goldsmith.
Ironically enough, this train graveyard is the place where some of them were actually built, now having been replaced by an electric service, have been withdrawn from service and are being converted into scrap. Within a few days, these will be reduced to just of characterless steel and cast iron, copper and other non-ferrous metals. Needless to say, there is a never-ending demand from enthusiasts for souvenirs of these old-timers, whistles, name and number plates, and there have been requests for the cast-iron chimneys weighing 3.5 hundredweight. Here, for example, is a number plate which will be saved for collectors. Unlike their flesh and blood counterparts, these old iron horses, as they were affectionately known, can't be put out to pasture at the end of their life service. They're not efficient enough for work anymore, yet too valuable to stand idle. Each one, in fact, is worth, in scrap, nearly £1,500. Hence we get sad sights like this. Pictures like these provide a sorry but inevitable reflection of the times in which sentiment is not allowed to stand in the way of progress. The age of steam is dead.
The age of steam had to finish because it is an inefficient means of transportation. Burning coal to turn water into steam is very, very, very inefficient. It's dirty and it's manpower intensive, and I don't think it could have survived into the 21st century, even if they'd had the will to do so.
There are engines here that I would have waited all day to see when I was a train spotter.
It was just disgusting the way it went out. Get rid of it, filthy. We should have been proud of our steam age.
Steam overreached itself. The world moved on, and steam paid little heed to change. In the kingdom of the railways, diesel and electric have usurped the throne. The glory of steam is played out, finished, gone.
The steam engine had been around for 150 years. It had done its job. The world had moved on. The day of the diesel and the electric train had come, and steam had to die.
Real old timer. Look at this thing here. It's rather pathetic when you think about it, because these things live, don't they? Compared with the diesel, they have life. Something's got to be done, you know. We'll have to save some of these.
And this particular example, which is pretty rough, but I forecast that when the preservationists have finished with it, she'll be like the day she was built. Magic. Pure magic.
The steam trains were romance, just wonderful, very, very fast, and they were beautiful things to look at.
If you want to look at this thing called transport, you still can't do better than come to Britain. It was our grandfathers who gave it to the world. Now we're trying something new again, and thereby hangs a tale.
I think if I had my time to come over again, I'd do it again. I loved it. I loved the steam engine. So smashing.
I've seen it running and the engines of its class, I think, all my life, and when I heard it had got to be sold as scrap, I thought it would be very nice to save it from that fate if I could.
Euston, rebuilt over the past 5 years, is now the most modern railway terminus in Europe. To open this £15 million showpiece, the Queen had travelled down from Balmoral. It's a complete transformation of London's oldest mainline station into her newest and most up-to-date. It's also the focal point in the electrification of main routes between London, the West Midlands and the North West. The whole atmosphere is more like an airport than a railway station, a definitely jet-set quality everywhere.
London, just as perfect for those who want to sit around and go places at high speed. It's the Kestrel, the world's most powerful single-engine diesel-electric locomotive. Built by Hawker Siddeley as a private venture, it is thought that there'll be a big overseas market for the engine. British Rail are already very interested.
British Rail bets everything on a simple formula. For every 1 mile an hour gained in speed, rail revenue would increase by 1%.
The Deltics, for example, line, the old technology, they weren't going to cut it. They were too heavy. They couldn't go any faster. They were just too heavy to go really, really fast.
And the Japanese were already going at 200 miles an hour by that stage, so we had to do something.
The Boffins at Derby start work on designing a brand new kind of train.
We really saw this as the big white hope of the future.
This innovative new project, the first of its kind in the world, is called the Advanced Passenger Train, or APT. It was incredibly innovative. Nothing else like this had been developed anywhere in the world.
Transport Minister Barbara Castle, escorted by the chairman of the British Railways Board and other high-ups, visited the Railway Technical Centre and toured the workshops. Half of British Railways' new carriages are manufactured here. Railway research, design and development never stop. 99 Freightliner containers have been produced so far this year. They're ready for service now that Union opposition is withdrawn.
Long before Peter Parker arrived at British Rail, it was obvious Britain needed a new high-speed train. In 1968, Barbara Castle, the Transport Minister, visited British Rail's engineering works in Derby to give the scheme her public backing.
But finally, in 1969, Alan and Mike were given the green light, enough funding to build their tilting train. With millions invested, they told the world about their glittering new project.
This is a model of the advanced passenger train on show at Marylebone. It's been calculated that such trains could be capable of at least 150 miles per hour on existing tracks and might be in service by about 1974. The train, the result of research by BR technicians, is designed to iron the bumps familiar to rail travelers. It's aerodynamically designed and will be made from light alloys and driven by lightweight gas turbines or electric motors. Air conditioning and maximum comfort for passengers, plus an almost silent ride, are other important features of the train.
Behind the scenes, a cheaper, less romantic idea was brewing. A high-speed diesel train which could travel at 125 miles an hour. The high-speed train team was headed by Terry Miller, a lifelong railway engineer.
Terry Miller went to the British Railways Board and said, would you like a 125 mile an hour train when you deliver your prototype in 22 months?
The race was on between two teams, both working within British Rail.
Largely thanks to government help, British Rail announced an expected profit this year of £10 million. To stay in the black, they must offer a reliable high-speed service.
British Railways have got to do their damnedest to get some results here and now with what they've got to show that they can do something which is going to justify this investment.